welcome you to the Grace Cafe. My name is Mark Rae. I'm your host today. Hopefully you've got your wonderful mug of coffee with you or a cup of tea with you, and you're going to settle in for a conversation we're going to have with Dr. Nick Ellis. Nick, great to see you. Let me give a little bit of an introduction. Dr. Nick Ellis is a doctor of philosophy from Oxford. He is an author. He is an educator. He is an entrepreneur. He's a pastor. Speaks multiple languages. There's a whole lot that you have done, Nick, that really has an emphasis point coming all the way back through your family tree. You and I have talked about this before at a couple of lunches, and there's just a fascinating story about your family tree. Would you mind just, as we have people climbing on board here, would you mind just kind of walking us back through your family tree and where this focus of education has come from? First of all, let me welcome you again. Glad you're here on Grace Cafe. But begin and walk us through this backdrop of your family tree and your history in the whole process of education and pastoral work.
Yeah, well, Mark, it's great to be here, and a real privilege to be sitting with you and talking and chatting over coffee here at the Grace Cafe. It's been just a tremendous joy to see this ministry grow. And within my family, as you said, we've had a multi-generational focus on the formation of the mind and the heart from a perspective of grace. And really, through the legacy of my family, I'm a strong believer in the opportunity to develop multi-generational strands of faithfulness. I have a long family history that I'll get into, but I do want to say that if you're listening to Grace Cafe and you're thinking, well, man, I don't have that kind of background, like, guess what? You can start right now. You can be the foundation and the roots for multi-generations of faithfulness and dedication to grace. So I don't tell this story to in any way discourage you, but rather to say there's tremendous power and tremendous longevity in godly faithfulness.
To your point, in your family, it started somewhere. It started with somebody. And I think what you're saying is that whole thought process can start today with a new generation.
That's right. That's right.
So unfold it for us, would you?
Yeah. And so my family, I come from a kind of an interesting, mainly German background, primarily Anabaptist. On the one side, on my mom's side, my grandfather is a Hutterite Anabaptist from Montana, Canada, from the border country, and they came over as Hutterite Anabaptists, and we can trace that lineage back through about 1580, where these people through the Reformation were looking for a place where they didn't have to serve in the army. They didn't have to fight the battles and the wars that were going on between the Lutheran, Calvinist, and Catholics, and said, we're going to try to find a place where we can live and farm. They're a bunch of farmers. And in fact, my grandfather's name, Herb Hofer. Hofer just means farmer in German. And indeed, there's this long generation of Hofers and farmers. And migrating from Swiss, Austria, through Russia, where they found for several generations worked under Catherine the Great, because she said, "I'll give you this land, come farm," and they said, "As long as we don't have to fight in the wars, we won't." And they did not want to serve these forces of kind of political back and forth within the craziness that was happening in Europe at that time. And so they farmed there for several generations. And then the next king came in and turned that all over. And so then they migrated to South Dakota, and then to Montana, and then to Alberta. And so what's fascinating about that is how you can look back and see just a consistent dedication to the preaching of the gospel.
Which just for a minute, there's a connector here These are farmers who, which you usually, at least we in present day, we don't think of farmers and scholars in the same category, or farmers and educators. And yet, if you look back in Jesus' day, it was an agrarian society. They were all farmers, and that's where they came from.
That's right.
So
That's right.
you've got a rich tradition there of that.
That's right. And the formation of the mind and the heart, it's interesting when you look at questions of power. There are people who think, and some of this is personality, some of this is culture. We need to operate in the halls of power. We need to be purely in the universities, in the state house, and we need those people. We absolutely need those people that have a calling to be active and to be in the public square. I think what's interesting about a big part of my background is that these people are unknown. Nobody knows about them. They have never looked for recognition or power. But for 400 years, you have a seedbed of faithfulness. This summer, I'm going to a 5-year reunion in Canada of the family. This is my grandmother's side, the Isaac family. These are Mennonites. And my great-grandfather, Saul Isaac, had 13 kids. Each of those had at least 8, and each of those had at least 5. And so there's more than 500 people in that generational tree that we're going to go to one of the farms, and they're just going to open up the barn and lay out all the food, and we're going to spend 4 days playing volleyball with a bunch of white cap wearing, long skirt wearing, big bearded Anabaptists in Canada. And that's not my culture anymore. But I tell you, there is something special about seeing 500 people, the vast majority of whom are fundamentally dedicated to the Lord. And not many are going to have that many kids, but just thinking about my great-grandfather. And the last time I saw him, I brought one of my children. I have 5 children. One of my 5 children to him. And by that time, there was almost 400 people in his direct lineage. And this 6'4" Moses figure, huge white beard, who looked at my child and said, I love you. I don't know you, but I love you. And I think that there is something powerful about that. And so we basically continue that tradition in our family. We have, I would say that we migrate or we tend rural. My father, we moved to rural Brazil in the early 90s as a missionary. And he's a professor of systematic theology. His name is Mark Ellis. And we continued to press in, saying, even though we're here in the far north reaches of Brazil, where there's nobody, let's continue to invest in the Christian intellectual tradition, because it's here in this kind of seedbed, grassroots environment that we can preserve and develop and continue on with the Christian intellectual tradition. And so that thrust me from Brazil back to the States, and from there to Oxford and Jerusalem, where I did my studies. And we want to continue that tradition, and we just believe that there is power in a long-term, multi-generational dedication to faithfulness.
So, this is, for those of you who are listening, this is a fascinating look all the way back, 1600s coming forward and seeing this channel of education come forward. If you're just coming on board, let me ask you to share this. Share this on your timelines. Let other people know this conversation we're having with Dr. Nick Ellis, and get them to climb on board right now, because this is a fascinating conversation. Nick, I want to turn your attention a little more personally to you. You were raised in Brazil, born here, but raised in Brazil, correct?
That's correct.
And you were basically homeschooled. You and your brothers and sisters were basically homeschooled in Brazil at a time in which homeschooling was not a popular thing, or was it even
not a legal thing?
It wasn't. Yeah, well, it wasn't mainstream, and it wasn't a legal thing. And yet, that tradition of education that has come through your family, and as a matter of fact, let me put it this way: Romans 12:1 and 2 says that you're transformed, beginning with the renewing of your mind. your family took that to heart, this whole movement of educators and especially biblical education that was a part of your upbringing. And now tell us what your brothers and sisters, you've got a sister who's an opera star. Is that right? You got a brother.
Yeah,
Tell us your family real quick.
So yeah, we grew up in the north reaches of Brazil, and there weren't a lot of options for education. And so we decided to attend half-day schools, half-day in the Brazilian context, mainly for culture and language purposes. And then we read great books. We invested to take books to Brazil, to the North Brazil. And you can kind of think of it like Swiss Family Robinson. We're like, why did that mom take that organ? But we're going to have music. We're going to have books.
Yes.
And we surrounded ourselves with the great voices of the past and present. And so that built an environment for the stimulation of our minds and hearts. And it wasn't all in humanities. I'm a humanities guy. I did classics and I did theology and linguistics. Most of my writing has been either in linguistics and Greek aspect theory and Jewish studies and Christian origins and those kind of things. But my twin brother, is the structural engineer at Quest Aircraft. Makes the Kodiak airplane. He was a LeTourneau grad. Came back and studied at LeTourneau here in Texas. My young brother Ian is a medical doctor, a successful ER doctor here in Texas. And then my youngest brother is an operatic tenor. He sings in New York and Georgia and kind of all over the world. And my sister is an anthropologist. She's finishing up her degree in counseling at Southeastern Seminary. And so it's possible. I just want to say that it is possible for those people who are thinking, we don't have access to those kinds of resources. No, you do. You really do, especially in this day and age. Through technology, through what we're doing here, sitting and chatting online, through books. And so in many ways, our life has become, my life, my professional life, and my ministerial life, has become a question of how do we bring those resources to people globally.
Because your dad did that. He's a seminary professor in Brazil.
That's right.
Your mom is kind of let me put it into a Mark Rae paraphrase here. Your mom is the queen of homeschooling of Brazil. So again, that education, that transformation by renewing your mind through that education is a huge part of what your legacy is, your family legacy. And it sits so, it resides so deeply within you that through a number of different entrepreneurial pursuits, you've looked at how do we make this education global? How do we make it accessible? Talk a little bit about that and what your movement has been through through global education efforts.
That's right. Well, when I left Brazil and ended up at the University of Oxford, the thing that was the most stamping on my own character and heart was the tremendous investment in the local community that we found at Oxford. I figured out that one of the great secrets in education is that there is a University of Oxford, which is kind of a lie. There is no such thing. You think there is, but then I walked into the city and I found that actually in this very large university, there was an examination hall where people took tests, but there was no campus. It was made of these constituent 55 colleges and private halls where you have your community and your rowing team and you eat and you have your fellowship in the community. And that was incredibly formational for me. My college experience at Oxford left an indelible impression on my own heart, and especially as I began to see online education emerging. We are really excited about the scalability and the flexibility and the reach that happens with online education. And it solves many of the problems that we faced in Brazil: access to professors, access to accreditation, access to resources and books and those kind of things. But one of the things that we began to press into was, as we build in access to technology and online education, how do we not at the same time strip away the deep, rich community side of things, the durable networks, the relationships, the local access to your pastor and your work and your mentors and your tutors and job placement and all those kind of things that naturally happen through this very formative period of education, whether it's through high school or college or undergraduate or graduate school. And so through a bunch of relationships, especially with Grace School of Theology and a couple different universities, we began to enter into some partnerships where we began to where I began to focus on the local implementation and begin to say, you guys do what you do best, which is the creation of very high quality access to formal education. If you do that well, I don't have to go build more schools.
Yeah.
I don't have to put millions of dollars into accreditation and standards and all that kind of stuff. You do that well. At the same time, I'm going to start developing and investing in local communities of formation. And whether that's K through 12, so we licensed the rights for Classical Conversations, which is a very large homeschool network here in the States. We began to implement that in Brazil and immediately had over 150 people fly in from all across Brazil to be trained as local directors to say, we want to be the local hub for classical Christian Christ-centered K-12 education. Okay, how do we build those communities?
Yeah.
How do we invest our time, our effort, our creativity, our resources in building up a strong local hub for the formation of the mind and the heart within the
before you head, let me nail something down here real quick, because what you're basically saying is that content is accessible.
Right.
But what's missing is don't forsake the assembling together. What's missing is the development of community. What's missing is the interaction of one person to another, because let's face it, we can sit and get a good education sitting with our laptop by ourselves.
Data transfer, exactly. Yeah. Technology has made data transfer astonishingly accessible. I can learn a tremendous amount through our online. In fact, there are certain courses that I would say you might even be able to learn more. In fact, I'm convinced you can have better data transfer online at times than sitting in a very large classroom with no ability of pausing, reading, questioning, okay, what's going on here? And so I am enthralled with what technology has given us over these last really 10 to 15 years. It just has not been very long. But there are ramifications for that. We don't want our pastors having sat through an entire MDiv alone in their basement or in their bedroom with no relationship, no mentorship, no discipleship. And then they wonder why they come out with a degree and they say, oh, where am I going to get a job? I don't know anybody.
Or,
where's the church?
How do I apply this? Here's this education. I've got this great education. How do I apply this to everyday world? Because you've been to seminary, I've been to seminary. We know that there are things that you only learn on the job, that a seminary can't possibly encompass all of that. In fact, how many times have you heard, let's talk about the things I didn't learn in seminary that happen on the job? That community, and especially as you're talking about it, the development of discipleship and mentorship it's biblical, first of all. I mean, it's incredibly biblical. But second, it's invaluable to the shaping of that content.
And and this is not just a question in education. I mean, we see this with Facebook. How is it that Facebook or Instagram can somehow become a toxic environment where there's more loneliness sitting and watching other people in their best possible scenario, in their best possible angle, with their best possible selfie. And we sit here and we think, man, woe is me. My life's terrible. Well, we want to start to say and encourage communities through resources and through implementation models and through partnerships to say, yes, let's take advantage of this world-class education that we have available at this point. And let's also not strip away the kind of incarnational, in-person, durable networks that we want to build by using and leveraging on that content. And so that's a
Yeah.
passion that's driving what we're doing from K through university. We have 4 sites in Brazil that we were investing in. We were in Uganda working with a marvelous organization called One Hope. We were with them last year building a site in Uganda at Watoto Church in Kampala, Uganda, a tremendous, tremendous church. We think that that environment, that ecosystem of formation, is going to be a transformational nuclear hub for that region. I mean, here's a church of 36,000 people because Idi Amin killed off 2 generations ago and AIDS killed off the last generation. We've got 36,000 people in this church, and 90% of them are under the age of 30. And so let me
Yeah.
repeat that. 90%
Yeah.
of this church
90%.
is under the age of 30. And so they're coming to us and they're saying, yes, education's great, but we don't have any parents. We don't have any grandparents.
Yeah.
We don't have any aunts. We don't have any uncles. You've got to build in mentorship, tutorials, local fellowship, local community around this educational experience so that it can actually transform us.
Well, and that's not just that, though that's significant to say that in a unique environment like Uganda, where you had those two tragic situations occur, but that lack of community is a worldwide global phenomenon that a number of different resources are trying to solve. What you're basically saying is, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Nick, but here's what I hear you saying. That structure already exists, and it exists in the church.
That's right.
That the church can be that global community developing place where discipleship and mentorship, exactly as the New Testament says we ought to be doing. I mean, older men teach the younger men. 2 Timothy 2:2, train up others who will train up others who will train up others. That community already exists in the church. What you're doing, it sounds to me like, is you're bringing in the quality education into an existing community and now giving reason for that community to exist beyond the church.
That's right. And I would say sometimes I wonder if it's we're leveraging on the community to create education, or if sometimes we're leveraging on the access to education to create community, because there are churches that have lost their way. There are churches that no longer are investing in the discipleship of their young men and young women, and they don't know what multi-generational formation looks like. And so what we're doing is we're taking this asset, which is education, and we're kind of using it like a carrot to say, let's gather around this valuable thing here, and let's think about, what does it look like to form good men? What does it look like to form godly women? And I can bring people to the table through accredited K through university education, but ask the questions that are much more meaningful. Not just how do you get a degree, but how do we form good, godly people? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's the huge element of this, that when you and I talked about this now 8 months, almost a year ago, the thing that really caught my attention was, as you've said, quality education is out there and it's accessible, but what really makes this work is that mentorship, discipleship that I'm walking right there with you. One of the things you see even in pastoral work is you can ask another pastor, are you discipling anybody? And their answer is no. And you ask them why, and their response is, because no one ever discipled me. And I don't know how. That process of bringing that together and teaching and training those, the opportunity is, yes, it's global. But I think you're right. It's the opportunity to get the church back on track to what we're supposed to be about, what the church is supposed to be about. And that's, again, that's where transformation occurs. Yeah.
That's right. I got to tell you, Mark, we thought that this was going to be primarily an international question, and the demand within the U.S. domestic market for churches who are coming in and saying, yeah, we don't know how to do this either. Especially in, we've got places like Omaha and northern Idaho, and places that are saying to us, can you come here and form one of these? Because this can be an opportunity for us to join together in community for the transformation of minds and hearts. And so
Yeah.
we're pretty excited about what this could mean for the American church as well as the international environment. I feel like that we are we're in a position now in this country where we need to start learning from the international church, where the international church is looking at us and saying, I think you've forgotten something. I think
Yeah.
you've forgotten the power of family. I mean, in this community, in this U.S. community, the transitions that we go through, we can live anywhere, we can move anywhere, we can do anything, and it has been an amazing movement of people. And in the meantime, so many of us have forgotten what it looks like to just pour in locally. And I lived globally for so long, and it was really coming back to my roots and seeing my family in South Dakota, where they know where their grandparents are buried, they know where their great-grandparents are buried. They have that. And I wouldn't want to give up my global access on the one hand, but something was sacrificed. Something had to give. And I find myself moving now from reading about global politics and globalism, whatever, and suddenly I'm back into Wendell Berry and reading about the need for local investment and how everything ultimately is local. And we can't forget that. And this is a temptation, I think, for guys like you with the Grace Center, with Grace School of Theology, where we're constantly thinking out. Look at the need, look at the opportunity. And how do we put a check on our hearts to make sure that, if you are living purely internationally and you aren't living locally, you're building very little that has durable, tangible, ongoing legacy. I'm convinced that everything has to be local. Everything.
And that's, I think you just, your last little statement, durable, tangible. You can't do durable and tangible. Durable and tangible happens in your own, right around you. That's where durable and tangible goes.
That's right. And I'm convinced that we have to increasingly watch our eyes and watch our hearts as the opportunity is to be distracted and diffused and dispersed. How can we also come back and say, I haven't talked to my neighbor 3 doors down? And I'm speaking of personal experience. I've lived in this house in Arlington for a year and a half. How have I not talked to that person who lives 3 doors down from me, and I have no idea who he is? I think we have to realize that we've got to live local, even as the opportunity to minister and educate globally is right here with us.
So I've got this coming through on a text, a question that's come in, but there's really a lot of, I'm going to throw this at you because hang with me for a minute. It's a long text. It says here, I am the director of high school here in Spain. All the classes are very technical with digital screens, internet, etc. Also, the interaction with families by apps and other things. The question we see here is that there is a lack of values and human capabilities. Our biggest problem is the coexistence in the school. Technique without humanity is a problem of the 21st century, and humanity without Christ, of course.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, here's real world testimony to exactly what you're talking about.
That's right.
And this is from Spain.
I think what we have to realize is when you use technology or your phone, your Facebook or your Instagram posts, you're mediated with technology, and you're presenting a face. You're presenting something that you want other people to see. But in real life, it's them watching when your face falls after the photo and you become crestfallen, and there's something in your heart that was not communicated in the picture or on the text. And unless you can live and say, I've got to talk to this person, something's not right. That is humanity. We're not just a techno-human hybrid that somehow can live in a digital world. We have to live and invest locally. And this is tremendously convicting to me.
Yeah.
Because I live globally, primarily through technology. And so how can we tithe ourselves? I almost have to tithe myself to say, let me give the best of who I am to my local church, even as the temptation is to invest 220, 230 days a year of travel internationally. How can I make sure that my heart is always where God has placed me?
Yeah, it's a wonderful statement, and maybe let's kind of wrap this up, because the back end of this thing also says that there's a real need for the guarantee of authorship of the knowledge that's there. So the other thing you're saying is we're not just talking about knowledge for the sake of knowledge. We're talking about quality knowledge, biblical knowledge coming from reliable sources that then can be transferred and translated into that mentorship and community. Am I putting that in the right context?
That's right. And so I think one of the great opportunities that we have now is access to great curated historical classical knowledge. I mean, that is the tremendous opportunity that we have at our fingertips. Then the question is, how do we both steward that, but then cultivate it? And by stewarding the Christian intellectual tradition, I mean stewarding what we've received. By cultivating it, I mean taking it forward, investing in it, building it, growing it, and seeing the fruits that are born. And I think that, you know, we should not just abandon great knowledge. You know, we should not just abandon our Christian heritage. And we have access to tremendous resources and trusted resources that we can both rely on, but ultimately, how then do we steward and cultivate that in our local communities? And I think that's where I am with my passion. I want to take that and I want to help people plant it, grow it, cultivate it, and then bear fruit locally so that this is actually having an implementational effect, a transformative and durable effect in their local communities.
I've got a quote here on Grace Cafe on Facebook that says at Go Education, which is the entity that you founded to bring this global education out, you've said our heartbeat is the return of the Christian intellectual tradition under the stewardship of the local church. That kind of I mean, if I'm going to put it in an elevator speech, there it is. There it is in 10 seconds. That's tremendous. I just love the combination of we don't lose the absolute necessity of that quality education has to be transferred, but it's also utilizing the vehicle that God already has put in place, the vehicle to reach, the vehicle to be in community, the vehicle through which that transformation can occur, and that's the local church. It brings the importance of that back into being. That's marvelous. If you're with us, my guest has been Dr. Nick Ellis. I'm going to ask you, Nick, to come back again because there's a whole topic that we didn't even get a chance to launch into that I am just fascinated about, and it's the topic of the Jewishness of Jesus in his time period and how that Jewishness and what he spoke into that community, how that actually affects us today. For the most part, we're not. In fact, we're not in the time period of Jesus. There's a lot that he had to say that affected that time period, that was written to that time period. But we have to take that and say, how does that affect me today, where I live right now? And I want to be able, if you'll agree to come back with me again.
Absolutely. I won't get into it now because time is short, but I would love to come back. I'd love to talk about just a lot of my scholarship has revolved around this area. How do we move away from the idea that somehow we've nullified or annihilated the Jewishness of Jesus? And I'd love to come back and talk about that. And it's been a tremendous pleasure to spend time talking about global education and local community formation with you this time.
I appreciate that. Our guest has been Dr. Nick Ellis. Thank you, Nick, for spending some time with us today on Grace Cafe. We look forward to having you back again. Keep with us. We've got another Grace Cafe coming up next week. I believe, I'm not even sure who it is next week. That's how live we are. I've got to check the schedule and see who it is coming up next week. Nick, we appreciate you. Thank you so much. We look forward to talking again. And for you all who are watching with us live and to watch with us later, thank you for participating. Share this with others. And if you want more information about what's going on at Grace School of Theology or the Grace Center for Spiritual Development, go to gsot.edu/center, and you can find lots of additional resources on what we're doing and how we can help to train you and equip you. Thanks so much. Appreciate you being here. We look forward to talking with you all next week, and Nick, you again when we get you on the schedule again. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Mark. God bless.